We're going to try to build in a lot of time just for conversation and question and answer and such. So we'll try to keep the presentation portion to a minimum. Thanks for coming, everyone. Sunday morning, a beautiful Sunday morning. So we're gonna kind of do this in two parts. We don't have like a joint presentation, but both of what we're presenting on kind of touch on these same themes, and then we'll kind of again leave some room for question and answer and conversation. So I'm Joe Riemann. I'm the Associate Director of Shared Capital Cooperative. I'm also a founder of Cooperative Principal, which is what I'll be presenting on today. And we'll just get started. So, building a cooperative society, transitioning to a cooperative economy. I've been involved in the co-op movement now for maybe 15 years or more. That's like the formal cooperative movement. I think I've been a cooperative person for 40 years now. So this opportunity, there's a lot of things, and I think this might resonate with a lot of you, this idea of divesting from Wall Street and investing in local communities, finding an alternative to capitalism, or at least the status quo of our current economic structure. This idea of getting back to more localized democracy and community wealth building and being more in touch with the people around us and building something better together. And just on the financial side, from this idea of investing in cooperatives, actual cooperative businesses also have a need for flexible, patient capital, which some of those things align well. People wanting to move their money and maybe willing to make some trade-offs on what the return is, given what they're investing in. And so a lot of this I like to kind of jump back a little bit, and when I'd gone back to school when I got out, like in, I don't know, early 2000s, I started working at the Wedge Co-op, and I didn't have a retirement fund. I had other jobs that had offered that I hadn't participated. And by the time I got to the Wedge, I remember being in the meeting where the guy from the retirement fund comes in and talks to everybody about their options, and then I was like, well, what do you do if you don't believe in Wall Street? What if you don't want to invest in Wall Street? And the guy kind of snickered and rolled his eyes and was like, I don't know what you mean by that. And I was like, well, I don't want to invest in Wall Street. I don't want that to be where my money goes. And he's like, well, I don't know, I guess you could do a money market account, which was like a Wells Fargo money market account. And he's like, but when you get older and you have kids, then you'll change your mind. And so if we kind of flip forward, and I've had different jobs, and I've had different jobs with different co-ops in that time. I worked at Equal Exchange as a worker owner for a number of years. They also had a retirement plan. All of these different jobs had different opportunities to invest in my future, yet what I was doing is investing in my time and energy into building the cooperative movement, and it seemed really off to me that I would bank my retirement on the fact that this economic system would need to still stay intact. Mm-hmm. This thing that I was trying to fight against and didn't believe in its sustainability would have to exist in order for me to have a retirement, and that seemed really flawed. So I started working towards this idea of what would it take to invest in cooperatives instead of throwing my money into Wall Street while trying to fight against Wall Street. So there's a lot of impediments that I kind of met up against. Securities regulations being one. A lot of the regulations around offerings and what people can do with their money are pretty strictly mandated by federal and state securities laws which protect the consumer. All of this is based on going back to the Depression, 1930s era, like regulations that were put in place so that people would be protected. And so basically I'm really simplifying this because I'm not going to do 30 slides on securities regulations, but very simply, if you make like $250,000 a year or you have more than $1 million in net assets, then you are an accredited investor. And you have a lot of bandwidth to do a lot of different things with your money. Because being of someone of that financial stature, clearly you can make decisions about your money, and so you're good. The rest of us, whatever percentage that is, 95, 99, what percentage you want to pick, the majority of us are not accredited investors, and so basically our options are to throw money into Wall Street. And it doesn't take many pieces to fit together to see that the non-accredited investors pouring our money into Wall Street, so that the very few accredited investors that have made money off of Wall Street and gain financial independence and wealth by extracting wealth through that system seems flawed as well. That the system is very much set up to funnel money to the top, to the very few at the top, and the very few at the top can do a lot of things with their wealth. So, I tried to find different ways to get around these things. What are some loopholes? What are some ways to navigate the system? There's also not a lot of, Wall Street, if you want to invest in Target, there's a lot of financial information on investing in Target. You can open up a business section of the newspaper and kind of figure that out. Or at least have a lot of professional opinions on the good and bad investment risk. There's not a platform for investing in co-ops or local foods or something in your community. There's not a lot of financial information or tools to use. I continued to try to find, well, what would that mean then? What would that look like to have more information about opportunities that exist, as well as finding a tool to use to move money in a new way? So, what about investment clubs? So this quote is actually specifically written into securities regulation in the federal securities regulations. So there's a specific formal entity that's recognized called an investment club, and there's certain exemptions that exist within securities regulations that are specifically catered to an investment club. And in a nutshell, an investment club is people getting together, pooling money, actively participating with one another, and then making democratic decisions about their investments and sharing information. So this idea of active participation. So instead of taking your money and giving it to a financial advisor who's going to take your money and do whatever they're doing with it, you're actively putting money into a group, sharing information amongst the group, and making decisions together on what happens to that money. So there's a lot of gray area as well, as there is in many of the things in our world, but very specifically, I started drilling down into this idea of what would it look like to use this model that is democratic in nature, is very much around self-determination. A lot of these themes that we find in cooperatives, in building a cooperative society, also resonate very well lend themselves to this idea of an investment club. Very community-based. There are examples of internet-based investment clubs where people are all across the country, but most specifically it's people getting together in their own communities, family, friends, coworkers, usually very small and accessible, and really building on camaraderie and sharing information and knowledge just as much as making an investment, and like it's not as focused on the return as much as the like community building that goes along with that, and shared knowledge, and doing something together. So a lot of the history of investment clubs, again, it goes back, to the late 1800s. There was, as Wall Street was starting to build, there was groups of people saying, well, I don't know what that thing is, and this is before securities regulations, and so people were trying to come together and say, well, I don't want to lose all my money. Maybe we can all work together to try to understand this thing that we're putting our money in. So even now, 1980s, 1990s, investment clubs were really big. I'm sure that people remember some of the different stories about some group of I think there was a group of women that went to the same church, and then they had beat the market. I don't know. There was a lot of stories in talk shows that would have big themes around investment clubs and people beating the market. They've really fallen off. The popularity has gone away. I think a lot of the articles I had read about them, basically it wasn't fun anymore once people were losing money. It kind of went away. The trajectory of investment club growth kind of followed the market, so to speak. But they aren't specifically, they don't have to be about Wall Street. It's really written around people coming together and investing in securities. Those securities don't have to be publicly traded companies. So we created Co-op Principal. Our tagline is investment clubs for the 99%, 100% dedicated to co-ops. A lot of the discussions and this work really came out of anti-Wall Street and occupation kind of stuff, Occupy Wall Street kind of themes and divestment. So how do we work? If you think of a bike tire or a bike, Co-op Principal, the organization, is the hub, and each club that we help organize are kind of spokes on the wheel. So we have this centralized organization that, in working with a local securities attorney that also knows co-ops very well, has kind of waved his lawyer wand on a lot of this stuff to say, yeah, this is okay, and this is good, and this is good. So we have the legal documents to form these investment clubs, and they can be formed anywhere in the country. And so the idea would be there's a club in Vermont now, there's a club in Boston, there's one in Detroit, there's one in Minneapolis, and we can all communicate together on what we're doing with our money, what we're investing in, what co-ops are needing capital in those different areas, and just communicating with one another on best practices alone. Like, what do you do at your meetings? How do you make decisions? Whatever. So there's a lot of information sharing outside of just our individual clubs. Again, trying to build this broader cooperative economy and cooperative society. So we meet regularly every other month here in Minneapolis. Some clubs meet every month. There's some decisions that the clubs just make themselves. I mean, of course every club makes their own investment decisions, but they also make, how often do we want to meet? How much money do we want to put in every month? Those are all kind of key decisions that the club itself makes. Everything else is very much like structured. Like we're all going to invest in co-ops, that's like a key, but some of those other decisions can be made by the club. And each club can decide on their focus or risk profile. So there might be a club that's just like, we're just investing in worker co-ops, that's all we're going to do. That's great. Other clubs, as long as it's a co-op, they'll make the investment. So we don't really dictate what clubs invest in, we just want to support the club's existence and growth. So all decisions are made democratically, so it doesn't depend on how much money any one individual has invested in the club. It's all one member, one vote. We really try to stick very closely to democratic cooperative governance. Some members might make additional side investments that's unrelated to the club, but everyone has a percentage of ownership of those investments. So once a decision is made, then you're investing in that. That's kind of this idea of like, if we get a new member, we just had a new member join a couple weeks ago, and so they're gonna put in $50 and they own that percentage of our entire portfolio. So they're buying into all of the investments that we have previously, if that makes sense. So it's basically the club owns all of these investments and you're participating and owning part of that club. And a lot of these investments, again, they're investments in cooperatives, and so they're pretty illiquid. This isn't Wall Street where you can trade one day and then the next day buy it back. It really is patient capital, and so a lot of the conversations we have are around what makes sense to you as an individual. There's some people in the club that can do higher amounts and want to. We, as a club, have decided on $50 a month, and that maxes some folks out, like myself, and other people want to do more. And so there's some people in our club that have started a separate club to put in higher dollar amounts because they want to do more, and that's great. So this idea again of building awareness of what opportunities might exist around the country, as well as building information sharing amongst different clubs across the country, and trying to build a movement of people wanting to do this with their money. Currently, our club in Minneapolis has 18 members. We have about 30,000 in investments total. The club started about 4 years ago with 3 people and has grown from there. Again, we have all the organizing documents that we've shared with people all across the country. Some people have just looked to starting an investment club, not necessarily to invest in co-ops, so I've helped them organize that as well. There's those 3 other clubs that have started that I mentioned: Detroit, Vermont, and Boston. So in total, Cooperative Principal has about $65,000 in assets that are controlled by the Co-op Principal clubs. And then again, we're working on building more clubs. The thing is, these numbers aren't huge, right? Like anyone that's been involved maybe has heard about slow money or other alternative investment stuff. A lot of alternative investment talk and dialogue and slow money stuff sometimes caters to or talks a lot about very high dollar amounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars in one deal and a couple people involved. And that's great that people are able to move money that way and are willing to do that. I think this idea from its origins was really around people of modest means being able to move their money in a way that isn't funding the system that oppresses and exists to extract that modest wealth that people have. So I don't have much. I definitely don't want to give it to a system that has been created to make sure that I don't have that much. Right? That doesn't make sense. And so we really do try to cater this idea of accessibility and not focused on high dollar as much as focused on building knowledge, building wealth, building community, and moving money. So again, just the idea of our one club having $30,000 in investments, there really isn't anyone individually in the club that would have been able to make a $30,000 investment in cooperatives. I certainly, minimums around the country, most co-op, to make a minimum investment is usually around $500. I don't know that I've ever been in a position to take $500 and just put it in a co-op for the next 10 years, whatever the time period. But being able to do that with other people and make that kind of impact and be a part of that is kind of the exciting part. So where we,
I just want to make sure I'm clear. So that means actually then that y'all have literally put 30 grand into 9 co-ops in the
Correct.
Twin Cities.
yeah,
Thank you.
and around the country. There's a couple different co-ops in other states as well. So where are we going? The next goal for this year is to work with, I think the club in Vermont is where we want to start. And because of interstate securities regulations, it's often very difficult for, like say, a club in Minnesota to make an investment in a co-op in Vermont. And so kind of the next step, the next phase of this model is that we as a club would do a direct loan to the club in Vermont, and then that club in Vermont would then make an investment in a co-op in Vermont. And it would all kind of flow through in that direct loan agreement with the club. So again, extrapolating, if there were clubs in all 50 states, this idea of organizing capital in a different way and moving it in ways that really don't exist currently is kind of our goal. And again, the securities lawyer kind of waves his little law wand and says it's okay, so I keep on moving forward. As long as the lawyer says it's okay, then we'll just keep going. An interesting development that really wasn't originally thought of, but some community-based organizations are starting to look at this model as a cooperative incubator. So as they begin to look at worker co-op development, how might they use an investment club model to at least start the process of people making democratic decisions together, pooling resources together, and once they create their co-op, they'll have a pool of money that can shift towards the equity into that co-op, and they've already had a history of working together and making decisions together. So that's an interesting development. And creating this model of community ownership and wealth building. So very specific communities using an investment club model to share resources together and make change in their own neighborhoods and communities. So again, outside of the idea of even specifically investing in cooperatives, but just reintroducing this idea of investment clubs. The concept of an investment club, while formalized in the United States and having a specific, tax designation, the idea of saving circles has been around the globe and goes back generations and generations. The idea of people using self-determination and building trust and sharing resources in order to lift each other up is kind of what the basis, the tenets, the pillars of this whole concept is. And that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years and exists around the globe. So it's not just about specific securities designation, but this larger concept of people coming together to make change and improve each other's lives. And how do we go from 60,000 to 600 million? That's the key question. We had 2 early funders to help us start on this path. And it was Organic Valley and Equal Exchange gave us some small seed money just to sort this out and figure stuff out. And when I did a 3-year kind of report back to Organic Valley, that is the question that he had. One of the key people at Organic Valley was like, this is exactly what we need and this is amazing, and how do we get from 60,000 to 600 million? And I was like, well, we might need some more grant funding. That hasn't come yet, but so thank you, and then we'll maybe just take questions and conversation after you. Do you want to do that, or how? What?
That's fine. Or if you have questions now and they're fresh, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple. You had mentioned other investments other than co-op. Can you define that?
Yeah, I mean, so we just invest in co-ops, but I know Slow Money Movement across the country has used the investment club model to invest in local farms or local food. And so we've shared some ideas back. I've talked with folks that use this model. So again, if there's a hardware store down the block and they're looking for they're looking for capital or something, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that some people could come together and create an investment club and then make it an investment locally. So we just focus on co-ops. This model itself can be used as a tool to do any kinds of alternative investments.
Is most of your investment debt or equity?
50-50. Yeah. There's co-ops have a specific ability to offer preferred stock, which is equity, but non-voting equity. And so we've preferred that mechanism over debt if we can, because we think it's just, I don't know, it's just it means a little more to the co-op. It's a little more flexible capital to the co-op, and so we usually prefer that if that's possible. But we've done member loans as well.
How big is your typical investment, or how big a range is it?
We've gone as low as 1,000, and I think the largest has been 5,000, but usually around 3,000. And a lot of that is just based on what we have available. And if we have $3,000 and then we make a $3,000 investment, it's going to take a couple clicks to build up enough capital to do another investment. We recently had a lot. We hadn't made an investment in a while, and so we've just recently approved a $7,000 loan type. What we're going to do is purchase part of a loan, a housing co-op loan from shared capital. So we will use the $7,000 and then buy a portion of an existing loan to a housing co-op. So that's a new thing.
And do most of your investments go to existing co-ops, or do you actually try to?
We want to find like startup co-ops. That opportunity hasn't made itself available to us. The club in Vermont has done a couple, and Boston as well. It just depends on where your co-op community is, but we're definitely not opposed to that. It's just, we don't really have, like, Co-op Principal doesn't come up with their own, like, loan documentation or any of that. We usually use whatever is existing, whatever a co-op has in existence, and use that. And so it lends itself more to existing co-ops more than startups, but we'd definitely be interested in investing in startups over existing.
So do I understand that the instrument that you're doing is you're literally just providing a loan at a particular amount to a co-op to provide them capital, and it's a long-term, so if that's correct, then what is the typical rate of return that you're charging to the co-op?
Well, again, we don't set anything. We're usually just using whatever tool the co-op is offering. So if the co-op has a member loan that is a 6-year, 5-year loan at 2%, then that's the vehicle we use.
So shared co-op then is not creating this. Actually, the co-op itself needs to create the instrument.
Co-op Principal is not creating anything. Shared capital cooperative, it gets confusing because I follow co-ops all the time. But shared capital, the loan, like that example that I just gave of us buying an existing loan.
Right.
Shared capital, as the lender, created the terms of that loan.
Okay.
and the rate of return. And so that would be an example where there's an actual lender that has established the relationship. We tend to just use preferred stock, which has some kind of goal return, or a member loan, which has a very set term amount. And in general, it's around probably 2 to 3% return. Sometimes lower, sometimes higher, but it's usually around that 2 to 3%, which beats. I like to always add the asterisk of I know people that have investments in like socially responsible investments, like they have their retirement funds in SRIs, and after you take out the financial advisor rate, 2 to 3% usually kind of beats that. So I think it's all right. But
Oh, I have two questions. One is, if somebody suddenly came in your group, suddenly came into some money and they wanted to put a bunch of it in all of a sudden, could they, or is it $50 a month? That's what the agreement is. And the second question is, when you guys decide what you're going to invest in, do you, is there somebody that's looking into things in a big way, or do you get together and go, have a potluck and go, ooh, nice graphics?
yeah, yeah, those are good questions. So on the first one, legally, any member of the club can't own more than 25% of the club. And so wherever the total value of the club is can determine how much any one individual can put in.
They put in more, but not an unlimited amount.
That's right. Yep. And then the second question, we've tinkered with a lot of different options. So early on, what we would do is have a couple people that are experienced in financials and underwriting kind of go through and put together a 4 to 5 page sheet, and then everyone in the club gets the same information, and then they can all discuss and make a decision on that. We've started moving more towards having a cohort or having a subgroup of the larger club get together and run through everything in a detailed way and come up with the informational sheet for the rest of the club, and then have a broader conversation at the club meeting. And I think that's a preferred method because we really wanted to get back and focus on this idea of self-education and sharing information, and that wasn't really happening if everyone's just relying on the few people that really know a lot sharing all that information. We really wanted it to be more of a process where people are gaining more financial literacy and access to that information. So.
You said that there's 18 members in your club. Does that seem like an ideal number?
We have like a best practice, of 10 and no more than 20. I think it gets unwieldy to both find a location to meet as well as have everyone actively participate if it gets over 20. It's just it's hard to have an hour-and-a-half meeting and have everyone be able to engage in a significant way if it's too many people.
Thank you.
So, two questions. First one is, do the returns do the income get distributed to the members on a regular basis, or is it kept as retained earnings in the club? That's the first one. And then the second one is, can the meetings be virtual? Is there any reason they have to be in person?
The meetings can be virtual. We've leaned more towards in person because we think that that's something that's kind of lacking in the world. So creating the third place is a goal. And then the returns come back into the club and then are distributed based on the percentage of ownership.
So they are distributed. They're not kept in the club as retained.
They are kept in the club,
Okay.
but it just increased. So if I get $5 out of the total return, then my investment in the club it increases by $5. Yeah.
What happens if someone wants their money, needs to leave, needs their money? Because these are all very illiquid, so how does that work?
Good question. It's only come up twice now. And really it's up to just the discretion of the club. So we all acknowledge that this money is not necessarily available immediately, but we've taken it on a case-by-case basis, and if we've had the funds, the club has decided to return the funds that the member needs at that time, but everyone acknowledges that that's not always the case, and certainly wouldn't be the case if all of us needed to leave. There's some more liquid investments than others, so depending on what co-op we have the investment in, that investment might be able to be more liquid. All of these things are based on board discretion or club discretion, but so there's options, and we could also transfer ownership of an investment if necessary, if it came to that. I mean, we've kind of built in these different scenarios, and everyone has the understanding that that's what we're working under, and that's why we have tried to make the amount that each person is putting in reasonable, so that it's not make or break, I guess.
So when you say transfer, does that mean a member could sell their membership to someone else?
Yeah, yep. So in that example, maybe someone having more capital to put in, if more individual members maybe put in more money at one time, then that would allow an exit of another member and just increase the percentage of ownership of the others.
And where's the money kept? Do you have to have, I mean, is it just in a bank savings account, or do you have to have a special?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So the investment club itself is an LLC, and so we have our own federal identification number, and then that allows to open up a bank account. So we had an account at a local credit union for a while. It wasn't the functionality of using a credit union, at least this one specifically, wasn't very functional in that we couldn't automatically pull funds every month. So people were just coming with checkbooks, often forgetting those checkbooks. And so then I would just who used his checks, right? And so it got a little bit cumbersome of me collecting checks and then going to the credit union and making a deposit and all this rigmarole. So we ended up making a partnership with Shared Capital Cooperative, who has investment notes and has demand notes, which are not long-term investments, just like 30-day demand notes where we can put money in and take the money out within 30 days. And so what we did is create an account. Basically, it's not a depository, but we basically created a demand note for Co-op Principal, and then they pull the funds every month. So the $50 a month gets pulled by Shared Capital and put into a demand note. And so all of our funds are held at Shared Capital. And then when we've made an investment in another co-op, then they send the money to the co-op. And that's just a kind of a cooperation among cooperatives kind of deal that we've made.
Have you ever had a co-op approach you and say, we're looking for
We have.
funds?
Yep, we have. They were they weren't really ready for funds, but they did approach us, and I mean, it's funny, it's such a weird, because of my different roles and the access that I have, and my situation being both an employee of Shared Capital as well as being a co-op principal, I get stuff through the website, through the co-op principal website from different co-ops looking for funds, and our capital might not meet their needs, right? If we're just talking about $3,000, that's not gonna meet a $100,000 need. And so then I usually just redirect them to Shared Capital. And then there has been a couple situations where the co-op has just been funded through Shared Capital, just by that relationship, so.
What software are you using, and how are you handling your fees, lawyers, bookkeeping, those types of things?
So the lawyer was pro bono, and there's not a lot of other legal things that we need anymore, and so that's been taken care of. And that's kind of why we wanted to create the templates and then just distribute those to the clubs so that there is no legal fees that any other clubs would need. Software is Excel. I don't really, it's not that complicated. I don't have to do calculations of each investment every month because everything's changing all the time. It's just not changing, right? It's a member loan that has a set term, or it's a it's an equity investment. So these investments aren't changing valuation all the time. There's not really a lot of fees, and for now we're just kind of floating on on people showing up and buying their own beers, and I don't know. Like there's not a lot involved. So
Do you have, I'm just curious what, you've seen the failure rate and what kind of, what percent of applications get actually funded?
there's not a lot of, there's no applications. So usually anything we do, it comes from the club itself. There hasn't been any failures yet. There's a lot of our investments that are in food cooperatives, and as everyone knows, the grocery retail world is on the ropes right now. So we're kind of bracing a little bit, but again, this concept of building a cooperative society, the benefit of that is that you're sharing risk and reward. And so if there is a loss, that loss is also distributed amongst the group. So if I would have invested $3,000 in X food co-op and then the food co-op goes south, then I've lost $3,000. If I have 10% of that $3,000 investment, then I'm only losing $300. And it's shared, and it's not good, but at least the impact is distributed, and so that we can all share in that risk as well as the reward. Any other burning questions? Otherwise, I'll hand off, and then we can talk more after.
I have handouts, no PowerPoint. I have a PowerPoint, but I'm not going to submit you to that. Although that was very nice. I was sitting there reconsidering, should I? No, just stick with the plan. My name is Brent Olson, and if you were here to see Jan Joanidis, I'm her today, so sorry about that. Here's some handouts. I think I'll leave the clips on those. This one book here, I'll keep this. I'm going to talk a little bit about, and she sends her regrets. She's in Indiana with caregiving for her mother, so she couldn't be here. I work for a nonprofit organization called Renewing the Countryside, which is based here in Minneapolis, but we do work, and there's probably not enough of those for everyone, but anyway, but we do work mostly regionally, but have done some national work. We've published a series of books on innovative rural businesses, and so we started off publishing those books, and then we started creating tools to provide technical assistance to those kinds of stories. For example, this year we did technical assistance for specialty crop food growers. So somebody'd say, oh, look at this tomato, I have a problem, it is rotting on the vine. And we'd be like, well, okay, so hire somebody from either the University of Minnesota or a private consultant to go down to their greenhouse and go, oh, you have this fungus, never grow tomatoes in here again. That's a real story. And they were like, but we need to grow tomatoes in that greenhouse. And they're like, you can't, it's never gonna work. So we were doing that along the way, and then started to realize that while we can create an urban-rural exchange, some understanding, those books and other public education campaigns, we can provide technical assistance to make those kinds of businesses more robust and work. But one piece was missing is cash, right? People need capital to make those kinds of businesses work. And so we started looking around at various mechanisms and tools, probably 5-6 years ago, and met up with Woody Tesh. Does anybody know this name? Right. So he's founded an ad hoc group. It's real, like, I think there are 2 people, Woody and one other guy, called Slow Money. He wrote a book, and the premise of the book is investing as if food, farms, and fertility matter. Taking basically what Joe's talking about, taking a portion of your portfolio of investments, and he doesn't advocate you pull all of it out, like, you know, like Joe here's got, you know, this guy's solid, man, he's just got it. But he is also looking at it as most investors aren't willing to quite go there. And so what he's suggesting is take out just a small portion of that, 1 to 5%, which ends up being that 600 million, right? I mean, it's a big number but for you, maybe it isn't so much. And putting it into those things, food, farming, and fertility. Not human fertility, soil fertility.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that that'd be weird. And so then we went to a couple of the national gatherings in San Francisco and Colorado, hopefully bringing that convention to Minnesota in the next year or 2 years, which would be really, really fun. And started seeing what was going on in other states. Minnesota had already had some kind of slow money talks. People had kind of been getting together. There was the Hiawatha group and there's some others, but it didn't really gain much momentum. It needed somebody to kind of convene it, and that's one of the main things that Renewing the Countryside does for the Slow Money Minnesota project, is we hold the convenings, and we have one coming up in about just a couple weeks, I guess, a small one at one of the companies that presented looking for investment, called Gist Fermentation Bar. Has anybody ever been there? It's really cool. It's like I had a peanut butter and kimchi sandwich. That sounds weird, doesn't it? Until you think about like Thai food, you know, then it starts making some sense. But everything is fermented, and luckily chocolate and beer or wine are fermented, so add some fun to the kimchi peanut butter experience. So we're going to be doing it there and talking about one of the investment strategies that we designed maybe 5 years ago, what was called the Grow a Farmer Fund. And the Grow a Farmer Fund, which you probably see some handouts for, started off the very first one with a training facility in Northfield that was mainly training new immigrants on chicken production method. So they buy chicks, they built this one very specific kind of chicken hut that opens on both sides so that they can graze, because chickens are great grazers. They will eat the grass down to just the bare dirt. But when you've grazed one side, then you can open the other and let them out, and so you kind of keep this system going. So they were looking for, these new immigrants were looking for capital to build these kinds of structures. And as you could probably guess, they're not bankable, right? So they were very difficult to find a traditional source of funding for that. So we started the Grow a Farmer Fund with them and raised a donation-based capital to get these farmers started. Fast forward a couple years to Slow Money, we said, okay, let's do it again, but make it more broad-based. We're going to go geographic this time because of our funding partner. No, fiduciary partner. They did put some funding in, But we did at the convening, we announced the Grow a Farmer Fund, and it again is a donation based, and the reason is because of security laws, getting an actual equity or loan debt funding stream at the time was impossible. We now have, because of the Jobs Act, you can do crowdfunding or investing, which is new, but at the time it wasn't. So in about, just a few months, 3 or 4 months, we raised $100,000 to go into this Grow a Farmer Fund that is making microloans to farmers in a 20-county region in southern Minnesota. The maximum on those loans is $15,000, and the current interest rate is at 3%. So and we just made our first loan maybe 2 weeks ago to Tortoise and Hare, a wholesale vegetable farm in southern Minnesota, because they were in a bowl, and when we had a couple of major rain events, all of the neighbors' corn and soybeans filled in their bowl, and so they were drowned out, and this wasn't going to get better. We weren't going to change the geography, and their neighbors weren't going to stop growing corn and beans, so they needed the capital to build a waterway through their farm, which their farm now was just a random waterway. So that they ended up, we hired Lindsay Riemann, who used to work for New England Countryside, now works for Ecological Gardens, and one of the permaculture type folks from Wisconsin. We hired her with our specialty crop enhancement team money to come through and design this thing, but they needed the capital to hire the excavator and get all of that kind of stuff done. The planting, wanted to build in some kind of production thing, because it's not going to be, this waterway isn't going to be filled with water ever. Once a year, twice a year. So how do you make some production out of that? So anyway, they're using that fund to build that, which is really great. And it will, I think that the reason that the loan committee approved it is that it wasn't an operating capital loan or anything like that. It fixed the problem, so they don't have to do that again. And I think that that's why that worked out that way. So we're looking forward to some new tools that have come online. Minvest, has anybody heard of this product? Minvest is, and there are a couple of others that we've been talking to in Minnesota now because of the Jobs Act and your ability to pool capital and make investments. Minvest is already doing a few, like the obvious ones are breweries, and that's fun, right? Everybody likes to invest in that. But we're starting to have conversations with them and some other people that are building these online tools to basically grow that into farming and food businesses that aren't breweries, but we've got extra special laws in Minnesota about corporate ownership of farmland, which makes investing in farms extremely difficult, blessing and a curse at the same time. Can keep corporations from buying up farmland. I mean, there are exceptions. Family corporations, if you're related to somebody, you can start an LLC. That's completely different, but keeps Wall Street out of Minnesota farms, which is great.
Can I ask a specific question on that topic?
Yeah.
So is there so the cost of farmland is so astronomical, it's just a barrier for, you know, new people coming into farming. Is there, and then you spoke about, you know, corporations can't own land. Is there some research into trying to come up with a new legal entity that would be able to own farmland?
So there are currently a couple of examples of it. Every time a corporation of some sort has come to the state to get an exemption, they've been granted it. Because I'm on camera. It's probably unconstitutional, the ban on corporate ownership. And so if they get challenged, then the whole thing comes apart. So better to just go, okay, fine. No, okay, fine. But some really good examples of that have come out, which is the Hmong American Farmers Association on Highway 52. When you head down to Rochester, you'll see all of these little garden sheds and these big garden plots. Well, HAFA, an NGO, a non-government organization, bought the farmland and then rents it in plots to Hmong farmers. So that's a corporate ownership, and they got an exemption for that. So one of the other things that came out of one of our slow money convenings was Red Table Meat makes charcuterie here in Minneapolis. It's just fantastic, world-class stuff. One of their farmers up by Duluth, a pork producer, I guess I probably didn't mean to say that, but anyway, needed capital to buy the farm that they were renting, and they needed more stability so that they could grow their herd size, and it's difficult in a rental situation having that stability to know how to grow. So they, out of that meeting, there's a group in Illinois called Iroquois Valley, which does invest in farmland and has done so pretty successfully in Illinois, I think Indiana, some areas like that, but are now moving into Minnesota. And so they came in with the capital to invest with Weicker Acres to get them to buy that farmland. I'm not exactly sure, I didn't see how they've set their structure up, but it's just, so basically I think out of the 3 convenings that we've had, we've probably done about 1.3 million in deals in Minnesota so far in food and farming investments. So it's not a lot. It's not like Maine. Maine is, they're in the hundreds of millions of investing in, but it's still a pretty good start. So that's a little bit about Slow Money Minnesota. And if you have any questions or want to come to GIST on the 9th, that'd be fun. Hear more about sort of what we've been doing.
How do you spell GIST?
GYST.
Okay. And it's August 9th this day? I'll get it.
It'll be on the Slow Money Minnesota website. There's a registration page there.
So can I just say, so the project in Redfield that you invested in, this was rating all those Main Street project. Okay,
Correct.
Great project.
Yep, it is a great project. And so that was the first time we'd done that. And we tried a couple of different interesting techniques, like at the co-ops, we made little seed packs. So it was really just a tool to kind of give you something. So at the checkout counter, you could take a $5, a $10, or a $25 seed pack, and then just pay for it. And they would put that PLU or SKU number into the system, and then the co-op would know, oh, anything that has that SKU was a donation to the Grow a Farmer Fund. How long it took me to explain it to you, it took people longer to figure it out when they were standing in line. what? I thought it was a really clever, like, way to get, you know, people to put small amounts of money in every time they're at the co-op, but they didn't get what, like, why would I buy 3 corn seeds for $5? I don't know. But we tried again, maybe.
You know, if you would get chicken eggs somehow as a result of that. then-
Yeah, that would have been good. I'm gonna check here, see. I did keep some notes of things that I wanted to go over.
He had a lot more pictures in his presentation, by the way.
I didn't want to derail at all,
Yeah.
but I did just want to, since there's an open space to sort of
Uh-huh.
observe that the casual way, and I'm a lawyer, I think you're right, sadly the Minnesota law is probably under current legal doctrines unconstitutional.
Yeah.
But it does sort of beg the question, like, why the hell is such an obviously good, democratically enacted law unconstitutional at all? And it's sort of, I think that casual thing, and I can understand under video, like, the pause, but I think that those of us who were trying to literally transition into a peaceful, just, democratic, and sustainable society are going to have to come to terms with, we need not just new economic systems, but genuinely new legal doctrines that facilitate this instead of hinder this. And it's actually illegitimate for the Supreme Court of the United States to say that a community or a state does not have the authority to make such an economic decision.
Well, yeah.
Sorry for the soapbox, but I didn't.
I'm off camera.
I think that what we've been talking with other partners like HAFA, like Land Stewardship Project, Minnesota Sustainable Farmers Association, other groups like that, and saying, okay, so if this does get challenged and goes away, that would be bad. So let's go in there and open it up and fix it so that we can control it rather than just having it disintegrate in one big lawsuit. So, well, whether it's legitimate or not, I guess that's, I don't want to wait for them to poke a hole in our balloon. So, but everybody else is really nervous that if we do open it, then it's going to be gone. But it's, you know, it's like, you know, towns never open up their charter, right? Never open it up for discussion, because then everything gets changed. But I think that if we're gonna create more robust tools for investing in individuals, we're gonna need to figure out ways to create those laws and documents that allow it. So anyway, that's about it. Any questions?
Can you tell us a little bit about the background, how this got started, and
How Slow Money got started?
well,
Woody?
the renewing the countryside.
Oh, renewing the countryside? So my wife, who was supposed to give this presentation and would have been better at it, I'm sure, was working on, she was on her master's degree at the College of Natural Resources, a place where they really like to count things, like rings on trees, you know, numbers of trees. She did a very qualitative study on barriers to best land management practices. And when she was doing that, she was traveling around the state talking to farmers and woodlot owners and things like that. And there are just so many, and this was 20 years ago, was really, these guys were rebels. They were crazy, and their neighbors thought so, and they just didn't understand what they were trying to do. Sustainability now in farming and rural land ownership is now accepted, like you do things like that to conserve. So rather than stuff it in a black bound book in the basement of the university, never to be opened again, you know, like, I don't know, anybody ever had their thesis cited in someone else's work? It just doesn't happen. What I did, I owned a small advertising and marketing company, and I had a couple of clients that I'd helped publish a series of books. And so we saw a book from the Netherlands called Greening the Countryside. Why make something that you can steal? So we saw that book from the Netherlands, and it had artists and food makers and farmers and activists and manufacturers all across the Dutch countryside that were building these sustainable businesses, and thought that's what we should do with this thesis, is then kind of flesh it out with more stories. And basically it came out as a beautiful picture book. And I say, you know, if there's these 40 people in your town, it's going to be a great place to live. And that's what we need. So then other states came and said, hey, we have good stories. Why don't you come here and do that? And so started helping, like, Four Corners region, Washington State, Iowa, Wisconsin, and then did a little bit of work in Central Appalachia, telling some stories there. So started off telling stories, and then, like I said, grew into being more creating direct assistance, and now trying to find capital flow to support those kinds of businesses. So.
Do you have any idea why Maine seems to be orders of magnitude ahead of us? Why they've been so successful?
Did you see that new map of the United States, the 13, have you seen the 13 countries that are inside the United States? It's cultural, I think. I think they're just used to it. They more, it's just longer history of investing, not quite as bootstrappy as maybe the West.
But that might be a critical insight there.
Yeah. So we had Slow Money Maine and a couple of other organizations to the first convening that we did down in Red Wing to kind of lay out how they did it. And so we've been using a lot of their information as a roadmap for how to build out Minnesota. And I think, you know, in those 13 countries, we're both Minnesota, Wisconsin, and New England are considered the Yankees, right? So we all have a very similar attitude towards government regulation, towards community. I mean, have more in common than you'd think. So I think it'll work, especially now that we have like Minvest and tools like that, because this donation fund, while it's a $100,000 fund, you know, it was just a donation. People gave I think there were 19 people that gave over $200, and that's pretty significant. And one family foundation that gave $10,000. But the nice thing about this is that the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, our partner on this particular Grow a Farmer loan, is doing they're originating the loans, they're taking care of it, and they're doing it for free. So that's every dollar that went into the fund is going to be available, and every dollar from the debt interest will go back into the fund as well.
You mentioned Washington, is that DC or state?
State.
We have a slow money thing in Washington.
Yeah, so we did a Renewing the Countryside Washington state, and we did a couple of DC projects too, so I guess I was covering both as one. But that's about it. We're 15 minutes early. We could probably go outside.
I'm just make a quick plug for all of this type of investment, because a lot of people aren't aware of this, but 70% plus of Wall Street is non-human.
Yeah.
So that should wake us all up.
What does that mean?
What do you mean?
I mean, it's traded by robots.
Oh, I see.
We don't really make the decisions.
So either of you do you have any observations or ideas about tapping IRAs?
Do you mean like self-directed IRAs?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's obviously the way you do it, but do you have any experience with actually having people do it?
The only thing I know is, so at Shared Capital, we take investments from individuals as well, and there's been a couple people that have invested in us through self-directed IRAs. There's not a whole lot of self-directed IRA financial advisors that will do too much outside of the norm. Like, I mean, there's a handful that might do something more interesting or unsecured investments, that kind of stuff. So they're out there, and I think they're growing. I think that there's probably a market out there. I don't know that echelon of professionals, but I would think that there's a big space for financial advisors to get into that. A lot of them that I've talked to are just like, they're accredited and regulated just as much as the rest of the deal, and they don't want to take that risk on. So they usually funnel people more towards secured investment.
I'm a small scale, slow money investor, and just using my Roth as my liquid funds, self-directed IRA, particularly for the area of trying to do slow money for homes, invest in co-housing and helping a local artist co-op by itself, that kind of thing. We found a vendor in trust that, unlike some of the others, they have a per asset fee instead of a per value of the fund fee, which can, with these low returns, can use up the return very quickly or exceed your return versus per asset. If it's large enough investment in one, you can work it. In trust group in Oklahoma.
And so one thing I'll put out there for anyone who has their own business, so my business partner and I, we started our own self-directed 401k for our company, which we manage ourselves. And there is a company, which I'll have to look up, that helped us set it up, but we manage it completely ourselves. And so, as long as we don't break the IRS rules of, doing business with ourselves and things like that, we've held people's mortgages, invested in property and things like that. So it's one way to, you have to have your own company to set up the self-directed 401k, but if you're already entrepreneurial, it's just yet another step in that direction.
Can you explain shared assets a little more? You've mentioned it several times, but I don't have a
Shared capital?
Yeah.
Shared capital, so that's my day job, so to speak. Shared capital is a 40-year-old loan fund specifically for cooperatives. So we're a national loan fund. We were started here in Minneapolis when some co-ops basically went to local banks to try to get a loan for a cash register or refrigerator, and because of a cooperative structure, the banks want to know what one person they're going to go to if the loan goes south, and in a cooperative there's many owners, and so they just weren't bankable. And so 40 years ago, co-ops got together, started a revolving loan fund, and 40 years later there's still a lot of co-ops across the country that can't get bank loans, and so we're a fund for and by cooperatives, and we are a cooperative ourselves. So about 55% of our investments come from the cooperative sector across the country. We're about a $12 million loan fund.
So on your question about self-directed IRAs, so Joe, I wanted to invest in, so I wanted to roll my 401k over into Cooperative Energy Futures. I don't know, it's a local co-op for solar here in the Twin Cities. And so they drew up preferred shares, and then they had to negotiate back and forth with this company in Texas, Self-Directed IRA Services. And so if you, self-directed IRA, and they're, you know, in Texas, I think they're in Austin and Plano or something like that, but, so they had I was amazed how low their fees were. It's like, I think $250 to do the initial investment, and then it's like $200 a year or something like that. And they put in a bunch of back and forth with lawyers, their lawyers, and Cooperative Energy Futures lawyers. I'd say, you know, I'm guessing, you know, maybe there was, you know, several hours of legal time involved. I just was surprised that they hung in there and worked through it. And so I was like really impressed with the organization. You know, they were low cost, and they, you know, invested, I thought, you know, way more than $250 they were getting from me for opening up this fund. So I was very impressed with the organization.
And what was the organization?
Self-Directed IRA Services, Inc.
I usually try to make a plug to and encourage people to just, if you have a retirement account currently, just ask more questions, and ask questions of the financial advisor. That's what they're there for. And the more and more people start asking questions about where their money is going, and start asking more and more about where they can put their money and where they would want their money to go, then, I mean, we're a ways away from totally breaking open this system, but for right now, they're banking on the fact that everyone is a passive investor at this point. They have put a heavy curtain over the whole thing and said, don't ask any questions, we got this. Don't look behind the curtain. We got you covered, don't worry about it. I mean,
And they don't.
yeah. Yeah, we'll socialize the losses, and we'll take all the profits. Don't worry about it.
I think that's only,
1%, no matter if you win or lose.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know, I think that's probably a pretty broad brush.
Hey,
Yeah, I don't
that's
know.
why I'm here.
Yeah.
Broad brush Joe.
No, I know. Okay, so when Jan was at the university, like working there, you know, the golden handcuffs, you know, of the university job. You know, she had a 401k there, and it was, you know, she put it in some social investment fund of some sort. But that was really opaque, and if you did look into who was in it and how it was split up, it was like, well, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that. Now, and you couldn't do anything. They were like, yeah, that's what you get. And you're like, but I don't want it. Now though, like with Kelsey, our financial advisor, it's completely different. She if you don't want that, boom, it's out. And she can really, she's done a much better job. And like you were talking about real estate, housing cooperatives and things like that, that they've got in their portfolio, and women-owned businesses and nonviolent and humane animal, things like that. And you can actually dig pretty deep into those. And so you can be a much better investor if you're willing to go there and say, open it up. I want to see, why am I investing in European currency? I don't know. Well, you have to do that because this. Well, I don't want to do that. Okay, boom, it goes or whatever. So.
Yeah, and I know that I paint with a broad brush. I will say that yes, things have gotten better, and ask more questions so that you can get to the kind of person that he's talking about. Very often, that is not the standard person that you're dealing with at whatever employer that you're with. So as we ask more questions, then things start to change, and more people will try to respond to that demand.
But there's still that huge hole, which is investing in your community, where it's non-secured, or you want to be able to invest in the movie theater, in, well,
what does secure mean? I don't know. I was around in 2008, nothing was very secure.
Go ahead.
Right.
I'm particularly interested in this aspect of changing the culture and our understanding of economics and so on. So I'd like to describe briefly an experience I had as a private school administrator. It was the Waldorf school movement, 10 schools in the Midwest. Someone had generously made a bequest, and every year there was a certain amount of money that came in from this. Could be in the range of $10,000 to $30,000. And every year, the way this was distributed was, the reason I find this interesting is economics usually brings tears to people's eyes, but for the wrong reasons. There were actually tears in people's eyes in this process. So the school would submit prior to our meeting a description of a need they had, 2 or 3 pages, what they needed and what they were going to do with the money and why it was important to the school. We'd all get together in a circle. There'd be a column for each school on the board, name of the school, how much money they needed, and that's where you started out. And then we'd go around and discuss our need, why it was important for our particular school. And then we'd continue going around the circle until the money was distributed in a way that everyone thought was optimal.
Wow.
So for example, the school I was representing needed new playground equipment, but it wasn't on safe yet, so it wasn't critical. It was just going to be something nice to have. Another school had all their technology destroyed by ball lightning, so they were in danger of going out of business. So when it came to my turn, I'd say, well, I won't name schools here, because I don't, at least on audio. Waldorf School C gifts $2,000 to Waldorf School P, because you had your technology wiped out and you really need this. But they might really need that, but still they'll recognize that maybe this school needed $300 to improve the cafeteria. So even though they need that money, Waldorf School P will say, we gift $500 to Waldorf School A so they can improve their cafeteria equipment. And this goes on and on until everyone. So you have this enclosed community, you specifically delineate all the needs and how important they are, and then as a group, you decide how the money will be distributed to meet those. And as you might expect, usually the needs expressed at the beginning exceeded the amount of money that was available. So there was some shared sacrifice on the part of anyone. But you usually saw that the schools got exactly what they needed. And perhaps as important was the people going through this experience of actually, this isn't a matter of winners and losers. We can assess the needs in the whole community, and we can decide as a community how to meet those needs most humanely and effectively. And then on a small scale, it's really quite an experience that might be replicable in some other areas.
One of the pitches that we had at the Slow Money was for a meat processing plant, which there is a serious dearth. Anyway, the Kleins, also pork, chicken, and beef producers, were at the whim and will of one processor, and they couldn't afford that. You have to have some consistency in their supply chain. And they supply a completely fresh product. They don't freeze it because they go to restaurants, and restaurants want big primal pieces, that they can cut up themselves and they want fresh. So anyway, they figured out that they could, with their own production, they could cash flow a butcher plant. It wouldn't make any profit, but they could cash flow it. And then as they added on to their schedule and they brought other people's animals in, then they'd start making a profit off of those. So they had a good business plan. The countryside helped them write that, or parts of it. And they were looking for, a pretty good size chunk of change, but they were offering like a 4% return on it. And it was like, where is everybody? Like, that's awesome, take it. And I think they did get that in a combination of Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation gave them part of it, the local banks. You know, they sort of all got nicely evened out, so nobody was too high of a risk, and private investors came in as well. So, you know, things like that, you know, can be done. There's money to be made out there without taking advantage of somebody or being extra, you know, extractive. You know, it's really actually building parts of the infrastructure we need. So it's, and hopefully we'll have, I don't know if this next convening will have any pitches. It's going to be a really small meeting just to kind of update where we went with the Grow a Farmer Fund. But the next big one will be at Surly, so we're going at the brewery, and that'll be in November. And then we'll definitely have some pitches there, which is Slow Money's way of kind of skirting the accredited investor thing, because you can loan money to any of your friends. There's no law against that. So if you go to a Slow Money event and you meet somebody who just gave a pitch, you're like, hey, there's my friend. So you can kind of do things that way. But so hopefully we'll have some pitches at that, so you can then, you know, and then again, it's non-centralized. So Slow Money doesn't have anything to do with it. Like, you meet them and you go, hey, you want some money? You know, and you can make those deals yourself.
Are they online also?
The pitches? The last ones that we had, we have a recap of their pitch. It is not a pitch, because you can't do that either.
But there's a summary of the meeting.
Yes, there's a summary, but you can't just go on Craigslist and say, I want you to invest in my landscaping business. That's not allowed. You just can't do that.
But the Kickstarter's kind of like that, isn't it?
That's a donation, so you can donate any money you want.
Okay.
And the November Surly thing,
Yeah.
have you finding out about that? Can that be publicly announced? Will that be on the website?
Yep, it'll be on the website. And usually Facebook, we do a pretty good job of doing the events on there and keeping up to date on that.
Through Slow Money or through?
Slow Money has its own Facebook page.
Are you coming down with that?
Maybe.
She lives in Washington State now, but she's so here.
Well,
Yeah, we chose November so that other people could like actually make it through the snow.
So I don't know if anybody in here was at Jay Talkies, you were, yeah, a couple of, this is the local economic forum,
Right,
which
the left.
he talks about as for transition as a killer app. I mean, this is the way to build local economies in your own area by doing these economic forums, which they've done in Totnes 6 times, I think now.
They're donations, it's not investment, but it's.
In Totnes? No.
No, it's
some
investment.
of it's loans.
But it's private, it's private
individuals.
Individuals
Yeah.
providing money directly to businesses.
Yeah.
But it takes, you know, to your point, like the government at one point decided you're too stupid to make investments if you don't have $1 million in paper. A lot of people, it isn't that they're stupid, they just don't know what they don't know, and they just can't facilitate that, you know, with the clients. Like, okay, so here's $150,000. They don't know how to do that. So while you may have the chops to kind of make those connections and make a deal happen, I don't. I'm not good at that sort of thing. So a Minvest where I can go and, you know, throw $100 at something, or that's something that I think those tools are needed, because people just, their financial literacy is not, you know, I don't even balance my checkbook. I don't.